Hello again, everyone. Ambassador Terry, along with my fabulous co-host, Henry Wang, and we have another chapter of the fabulous book, The Roadmap for Sustainable Business live series. And we have two tremendous guests, special guests this week, Professors Chris Fleming and Nick Barter. Welcome to both of you. And I am really looking forward to this because not only do we have fellow Rutledge authors, they speak our language, the future normal. We're going to know more about that in just a minute. But I'm going to pass it over to my co-host, Henry Wang. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador Terry. It's great talking with you again and co-hosting this wonderful international book podcast. And it is also my great pleasure to co-host this podcast to two special guests, Professor Chris Fleming and Professor Nick Barter, who was, they were both introduced to me by my wonderful Rutledge editor, Kendrick Lowe. So we had the good fortune to share the same editor from Rutledge, and they are going to, they've just published my new book, which is this roadmap to sustainable business and net zero carbon emission. And they're going to publish the new book from Chris Fleming and Nick Barter on Future Normal. And they're going to tell us something more about their book. So we're really looking forward to this.
Well, I am too. Anything that has to do with climate and climate change, I am the first one on the street and with the biggest mouth, as my friends call me. So with that, I'd like to bring in Nick and Chris and give us a little bit of background about each of you. I understand you're from the famous Down Under, and obviously you have a great book in the background. So let's let you gentlemen come on in.
All right, thanks, Terry. So I'm Chris. I'm a professor of economics in the business school here at Griffith University, which is in Brisbane, Australia. I guess in terms of my background, started in public policy for the Minister for the Environment in New Zealand, and the New Zealand government. Then eventually came over to Australia, moved to Australia, went into consulting, mostly in that natural resource environmental space, which in Australia tends to be a lot about water, either too much of it or not enough, most frequently. And have been teaching into the business school, in particular the MBA program here at Griffith since 2009. Might pass over to Nick.
Hi, Terry. Hi, Henry. Thanks for having us on the podcast. Yeah, we're here in Brisbane today. It's late at night for us, actually, so it's very dark outside, but it's still very warm and pleasant. So I'm Nick. I'm a professor at Griffith Business School like Chris. I'm a professor in strategy and sustainability and how you meld those two to develop new directions for organizations. I've been here in Australia working with Chris for about 12 years. And the book that's coming out in November is a major piece of work for us. So we're really pleased to be able to kind of have it in the background and hovering over us and all the rest of it. And my history is a mix of academia and corporate. I spent the first half of my career in consulting and corporate land in strategic advice, essentially. And then the second half was in academia, and I transitioned to explore sustainability in academia and how you meld sustainability into new strategic directions. And that comes through, actually, I think, in a lot of our work and in the book, because a lot of our work is actually trying to push forward new thinking and new models for how we consider and think about business. And to come back to the core purpose of your book, climate is very much part of the challenge that we outline in the book, but not the only challenge. There are other challenges. But I think we'd also agree with you, Terry, that climate is the number one challenge for us, all of us at the moment, and how do we start to move forward on that? And Chris Chris and I spoke about that recently and said, we do seem to, across the world, have got ourselves in a real muddle about this. And, we need more pressing action because, Terry, I think you're American. And, we're watching what's happening in America and North America and even Europe at the moment. And it's quite something. And obviously makes us concerned about what may happen in our summer, which is your winter time.
Absolutely. And you mentioned it's late at night for you gentlemen, early evening for Henry, and it's very early in the morning for me. That's the beautiful part of our conversation, ladies and gentlemen, live. I say this all the time. Fantastic that we're able to do this and we have the technology. And, right now, I recently did a live. I do a weekly show, 2 Minute Tuesdays with Ambassador Terry. And I talked about climate change isn't coming. It's here. And it's no longer theories. It's no longer and when it does, it is. And it's our responsibility, every single one of us, because climate change begins with each of us. And with it, our voices carry farther. Our enjoined ability to talk to everybody around the world instantly, provide instant coverage of events that are not such nice things for the environment, in correspondence with the news and those kinds of things. It's all powerful. And we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, we're not talking about us today. We're not talking about you that are watching this, and thank you for doing so. We're talking about our children and our grandchildren, having some place for them to live, okay? We always want them to grow up and be healthy and have a great education. Well, none of that's possible if we don't get a handle on this technology. It's coming. It's getting there. It's spreading. And it's to a point where focus in our weekly planning must be taken seriously. And a lot of that has to do with this week's discussion, along with Future Normal, and that's green net zero investments and green money. There's a lot of money out there. And once we get businesses, Mr. and Mrs. Business owners, executives, and chief executives, this is all about making profits too. Somebody's got to make this equipment. There is business opportunities here. This is not another expense thing to deal with. This is a new revenue stream. And when we change our mindset from that of expense and inconvenience to R&D and adding to the EBIT line at the bottom of the budget line and our annual reports, now the mindset changes. And I don't mind, ladies and gentlemen, you thinking it that way. Just do it, okay? It's that important. Henry?
Yeah, Terry, I agree with you. You made some very, very good points. And really, I'm very honored to be invited by the G20 presidency of India, Prime Minister Modi, to join his G20 and B20 climate, energy and resource task force. We are working very hard to advise the G20 leaders and to write a white paper for their summit, which will be held later on this year in Delhi in around September. And in our work with the international experts and international organizations, they've highlighted that climate change is now the most serious threat to the human race and the world. And if we want to reach the net zero emission and carbon neutrality targets as stipulated in the Paris Agreement, then the world has to spend and invest in green investments about $270 trillion worth of green investment and climate finance. And now it's already 2023, so there's only 27 years till 2050, which is the sort of the date that many countries have pledged that they will reach carbon neutrality. So simple arithmetic means that you got to be spending about $10 trillion of green investment and climate finance a year. So that's a lot of green investment to be spent. And this is a huge challenge as well as a huge opportunity for the world in general.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nick and Chris, why don't you bring in future normal and how that plays into our conversation today?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Terry. But before we do that, I had the pleasure of reading Henry's chapter on finance, sustainable finance and green investment over the last week or so, and full of an amazing array of data, essentially, around levels of investment and so forth. But two messages really came through to me, and both of them resonate, I think, in our book as well. That from a different angle, but the messages are still there. Your first message was that green investment's increasing, but it's not increasing fast enough. And I think the second was that investment in addressing climate change makes sense. It outweighs the costs. And of course, that's a message we've actually known for quite some time. I mean, I think if we think back to the work done by Sir Nicholas Stern in the UK, and in our case, Ross Garnaut, both produced large benefit cost analyses of climate action, and both concluded really, really clearly that the benefits of climate action by far outweigh the costs, and that we should get moving. So I was interested to see that come through in your chapter as well. And of course, the green investment, one of the things you need if you're going to have green investment is to be able to signal to the financial markets that you are in fact green. And in some respects, that brings us to the reporting side of things, which was sort of in the concluding parts of your chapter, Henry, and certainly features one of our core chapters, is how our businesses or do businesses measure what they need to measure to report success in this world. And that, of course, takes you to things like People's Bottom Line out of John Elkington in 1994, and then more recently the integrated reporting and the 6 capitals, which I might get Nick to talk a little bit about shortly. And of course, from integrated reporting, we went also to ESG, which I know features quite heavily in your book, Henry, or that chapter at least. And then also the TFCD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Disclosures, and segueing now into the TFND, which is the Task Force for Nature-Related Disclosures. Also, just before I pass on to my colleague, just one further point. I think your point about the children and the next generation was also really well made, Terry, and is a core sort of feature of our book. And I'm not sure if you can see it just above my head there, but the subtitle of our book is 8 questions to great businesses that your children will be proud of. So it's very much focused at the current executive, the current leader, who wants to leave a strong, positive legacy for the next generation. But I might pass on to Nick.
Okay.
Sorry.
But I thought you summed it up so well, and I think one of the things I think about when I think about the transition we need to make in the next 27 years, if we're going to stand a chance of hitting those targets of being net zero. There's some things I often think about. One is last year when we were thinking about how much we'd warmed the planet since pre-industrial times, 1.1 degrees. Now we're at 1.2 degrees already, and we're supposed to limit it to 1.5 degrees. And so I get concerned about whether we'll be able to make the transition fast enough. And so even with your maths around 10 trillion a year, we've actually really got to get a move on with that investment. Then also I think about how some of it's easy and some of it's incredibly difficult. So the easy bits are at one level in a modern society like Australia, undoubtedly Singapore and Hong Kong and America, is we can easily make the shift to electrical road transport, battery transport for our cars, maybe hydrogen for our larger lorries, if you like, and do something similar with our trains. But then it becomes very difficult after that. to shift much of our transport sector, airplanes in particular. But then the other things I think are going to be much harder for us to consider as well are cement manufacture, steel manufacture, and particularly those two from the perspective of they underpin so much of modern society. There's a really nice book by a guy called Ed Conway about the material world, and he presents a really nice argument that you can track the wealth of a country to how much steel per person is available per country, how much steel is available per person in that country. And one of the arguments he makes is that because making steel is so carbon intensive and we don't know how to do it any other way at the moment, the amount of emissions we need to do, not to lift the rest of the world to anything like the standards we have around this metaphorical table, we'd have to admit 4 times as much as we've ever done in steel production over the last however many 100 years. I think it's something like that. And so part of my point here is to say bits of mitigation, if you like, are doable for us, and we can see the line of sight to the end. But other bits of the mitigation pie are really hard for us to do. We don't know how to do cement at scale. We don't know how to do steel at scale. And I don't think the arguments around carbon offsetting are going to fly, actually. We know that they're not actually as robust as we would like them to be. And one of the things Chris and I have started to kick around is, do we even have enough carbon offset capacity in our world, actually, with the way that we, prima facie, you could look at what's been happening with the bushfires in North America and say, well, there's just a load of carbon offset credits that we could have bought that have just been negated because the forest is burned down. And I'm laughing not because it's tragic, really. But my point is we're getting ourselves in real pickles, and there's some really hard parts to this transition that we don't fully understand, and offsetting isn't necessarily the way out of it either. So, thank you.
Wow, fabulous. Fabulous. We're also, again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening in this series. This is number 9 of 10. Henry and I are about to run out of things to say here in the very near future. To piggyback what Nick just said, there is enough happening. It's not happening fast enough. And when the interest in something, let's go back to a few years to the COVID crisis. When something becomes a big enough crisis, things happen. We are very intelligent people. We have very intelligent computers. And I believe that every day we're speeding up on the way we're treating and looking at climate change and its reality. Southern California of the United States a few days ago with that hurricane hitting and the massive flooding. Okay. They got more rain than they normally do in a year to a year and a half in 24 hours. That's huge. India's been dealing with massive flooding for a few years now, and that's not changing a whole lot either. That's another major economic area. The firestorms in Australia over the last years, they're getting bigger and they're getting brutal. A hurricane of fire is beyond the imagination to think about in our minds. And that's just a few things that we talk about. And we're talking about green money today, Henry.
Absolutely. And I think I agree very much with the good points that has been made by Terry, Nick, and Chris. I think really very important message we in the B20 and G20 task force is giving to the G20 leaders is that this is a great opportunity for the world to work together to rectify the problems that's been the climate change is affecting all the world, all the countries, and all the companies. I mean, a very good example is a recent survey of all the leading CEO in the world. They have 97% have said their company has been negatively affected by climate change. So they get the message, and they are now very keen to work on their climate action plans and ESG plans and developing their net zero plans so that they can meet their Paris Agreement commitments. And the leaders now are starting to realize that this is a tremendous opportunity. I think I agree very much with what Chris said and what I've written in the book. It's really the climate change damages are now really piling up around the world. And people are now seeing the impacts. And I think, Terry, you bring out the wonderful points of the hurricane, the flooding, the tornado that's been in the news in the last few days, in hitting California, USA, and things like that. It's even in the news today in Hong Kong. And we can see the flooding in San Diego and things like that. It's just amazing that to see all the, in the civilized, developed world that is suffering so much from extreme climate events. And really, that the key message we are giving to the G20 leaders is the damages are piling up, and it's going to get worse if we don't act together around the world. And if we do act together and spend the $270 trillion, then we can create a lot of green opportunities, green companies, green startup, green jobs will be result from this. And so this will be a better world for us to live in, with new jobs for our younger people. And like you say, Terry, for our future grandchildren, they will have wonderful new jobs to go to as well. So this is actually a really wonderful area that we can all work together around the world. So I'm very, very happy that we are talking together today on this very important topic.
Delightful.
Thanks.
Delightful.
Thanks,
Gentlemen, any final thoughts for today?
Yeah, I guess something that sort of came to me as Henry was talking there about the G20 and the leaders, and as that question of the relative responsibility of government versus the private sector. And certainly for me, that's been a bit of a journey of change, and that, as I mentioned, my first sort of professional role as an economist was in policy making. And so I felt that if we got the policy settings right, we could get business to behave and it would sort itself out. However, having taught in the MBA program here with Nick for the last decade or longer, it's become increasingly clear to me, and also seeing policy in action, certainly in Australia, but globally, it's become increasingly clear to me that the private sector is leading the way, and some of the data you present in your chapter, Henry, speaks to the volume of private money versus public, and reinforces that. And certainly the sort of the implied or the implicit understanding throughout our book is that this is a problem we will be looking to the private sector, private individuals, businesses to solve, because I think they are now leading and it's policymakers that are lagging in so much of the space.
Yes, well said. Well said. Nick?
No, I'm good. Chris does a very nice job of summing up, and so I think it's great. Look, I think, yeah, but now you've got me talking, so I'll stop. Thank you.
Well, thank both of you for joining us. Henry, another great one. Thanks for hopping in, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching, and don't be afraid to reshare this to the world, because this cannot be talked about too much. That's it for this time.